Okay, hey everyone. My name is Sarah Lang. I work at MBRC as a program specialist. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a bout of RSV running through my house, so please forgive any respiratory sounds that you might hear coming from my screen. We are in the fourth of 4 trainings for our local development districts here today. And we're really excited to go in depth on some of these standard forms that we use on a regular basis with our programs. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. Okay. All right, just a quick overview here of the agenda. Again, my name is Sarah Lang, and today you'll also be hearing from Georgia, if you want to just give a wave, and Andrea. We also have a few other MBRC staff on call. I saw Casey, I saw Sarah D, and I saw Rebecca. So they're just going to be listening in, and we're excited to go through what we have today. I'm going to just touch on the capacity work, which I touch on every training, but just some more updated information on that. Andrea is going to go through some 2024 updates, and then we're going to jump right into the form training, and you'll hear from me, Andrea, and Georgia on a variety of forms. Then we'll hop into a listening session, which we do every training. This is essentially, the point in the training where we want to hear from you, what's working, what's not working. We have a few sort of questions or talking points that we, want to ask our LDDs to get feedback. And then just some helpful hints, resources, and question and answer. There will be points throughout the entire training where we can pause, ask questions, but also if you do have questions while we are running through things, please feel free to put it in the chat. I'll be paying attention to that. So will Andrea and Georgia. So just jump right in with any questions. So with our LDD capacity work, this is something that was started earlier this year. As you know, we're looking to really put out a full-fledged LDD partnership program, which really helps MBRC and LDD hold each other accountable to serve these higher standards for our applicants to our programs, specifically for the underserved communities. We all know that capacity is a huge hurdle to getting federal funds. And so we want to try and make that as small of a hurdle as possible. So obviously you guys know about the quarterly trainings. That's what we're doing now. Our opting in as an LDD process, we just put out sort of our 2024 opt-in out to the LDDs. So most, if not all of you, should have received a request to fill out a form. And I think we're still waiting to hear back from maybe 10 LDDs, whether they want to opt in or opt out. So if you're not sure if your LDD specifically has opt-in or out, check in with other staff before filling out that form. But essentially, you're opting in to attend these trainings, continue to be listed as a grant resource, and maintain capacity when helping the MBRC grantees. Oh. This is the opt-in opt-out form. When you get a copy of this PDF presentation, feel free to click that. That'll lead you right to that form. But again, make sure we only want one from each LDD. So just check in with other staff people to make sure someone else hasn't filled it out. Looking into 2024 trainings, our first training of 2024, we will be training you all on our new grants management system, which Andrea will go over a little bit in some future slides here. and then also an overview of programmatic pre-application and application requirements. So look for that training to probably come February, March, potentially. We haven't landed on a date just yet. And then we really want to, we're not necessarily wanting to repeat training topics, especially since we are recording all these. So we would really like to hear from you all on, what topics, what subject experts you would like to hear from in these types of trainings. And again, during our listening session will be a time when you can share that, or obviously you can reach out directly to me with those ideas. Just wanted to sort of touch on what we've achieved through this partnership program so far. In 2023, we had 40 LDDs opt in. We added sort of sharing that LOI submission with LDDs. That was something that was asked for from you all. We've also been more cognizant of making sure LDDs are on email communication with projects. Oftentimes they either get left out or weren't added in the first place. And so we're trying to really make sure that the LDD is on that communication. We've hosted, at the end of today, 4 trainings with over 260 attendees. I forgot to take this next bullet point off the presentation. We're not totally sure how many new grantees were in the 2023 round. It's a little hard to sort of get that specific number, hence the X. But for Catalyst, we had 187 applications with 77 awards made, and 69% of those awards are in distressed areas, and we're required a minimum of 50. So we really like seeing that number higher than 50, obviously. And then for 2024, we're really looking to provide even more support. Ideally, we're going to see funding for project development support through different types of sources, potentially depending on the state, through state capacity grant funds. We're hoping maybe to do some in-person meetings or sessions. We've heard from some LDDs that this would be beneficial. 4 or more new trainings. We're going to make sure we have up on the website a resource library, so links to all of these trainings, the recordings and the slides, and then our grant management system, which Andrea will touch on. And we're really excited about this because this will, I think, once it's fully up and running, really allow a lot sort of more collaboration and ease of looking at documents and status of projects. So we're really looking forward to that. Andrea, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. Busy time of year for everybody, so we appreciate you taking some time to join us today. I just wanted to say that the topic of today's conversation was all about forms, and one of your LDD colleagues was actually the folks who asked and just said, "Could we just do one of the trainings dedicated to talking about some of these forms that give folks heartburn?" And certainly we understand why some of them do. I think that's the federal world we live in a little bit, but just wanted to make sure that similar to what we're talking about today, and as we look to 2024, that we are covering topics that are of value to you folks. We want to make sure that when you attend these trainings, they are helpful in you continuing to do your good work. And so I can just give a few updates as we end another really crazy year. As a staff, we've been reflecting on all that occurred here at the team in 2023, including the addition of, I believe, over 6 new staff members. We obviously incorporated the bill funding into our Catalyst program, so running the largest program to date that we have ever run. And we certainly have a lot on the slate for 2024 as well. So this seemed an important time to not just reflect on how far we've come in 2023, and there's always room for improvement, but some exciting things on the horizon for us here, and all of you folks too, in 2024. Sarah has mentioned our grants management system. For those of you who have slogged through the last few years with our application portal, up to and including 2023, certainly understood its shortcomings. We could not run our letters of interest through it. It was only capable of running one program, one application round. And that just is not going to work for us. It worked in 2017 or 2018, when we were running one program one time a year, but it was not able to keep up with where we were headed. And so we have been involved in a procurement process. We secured a contractor. We were hoping to have some dates to share with you today around when some of these trainings will occur. But I was in a meeting earlier this week, and we're waiting on our GSA. So some of this is the back and forth with the people who procure and make sure we're doing everything the right way. I do feel confident we will have some updates on training schedule early in January. And certainly will, as soon as we have something to share, we'll let all of you know. But we're excited, as Sarah said, that not just the ability that the system will have in terms of being able to do pre-applications, which we used to call letters of interest. It's just a new terminology for the GMS system, but being able to do our pre-applications and our applications across all of our programs within the system, and allowing access to both grantees and LDD partners. I think it will streamline a lot of our work. As Sarah said, having the ability to log into a system and look at something and make corrections in real time probably will save all of us a lot of email traffic and back and forth, and hopefully just be a much more efficient way for us to do our work. So that's our big exciting news for today as it relates to the GMS. I mentioned we're going to be doing training across this network, certainly us as staff, with our program managers and with our applicants too. So between January and March, there's going to be a lot going on, as it feels like there is every year. Also just wanted to note, some of you probably follow what's happening in Washington, D.C., but MBRC is currently operating under a continuing resolution, which means we do not have a program budget, or a commission budget, I should say, for 2024. What we have chosen to do, recognizing that it's important we get our information out and try to get things moving as best we can while we wait for Washington to do its part. We still are planning to release program materials. There'll be some basic information on the website by the end of this month, and then more to come in January. But we are operating under a continuing resolution. So there are some very important questions people ask, which is like, how much money do we have? And so there's some pieces of that question that are still up in the air while we don't have a budget. But we have plan A and also B and C. So we are in good shape as it relates to that. And then probably the biggest news, we have a new program coming in 2024, which is called our Timber for Transit program. I've got some slides dedicated to that. Some of you may have heard about it. It's some funding that has come to us through the Federal Highway Administration, really focused on innovative uses of wood in the transportation infrastructure section of our work. So I will talk about a little bit about that. Obviously, we have our Catalyst program, our Forest Economy program, and we expect to release the Catalyst program first with at least our bill funding. So we will be putting that program on the street, at least initially, with some bill funding. And then once we have a budget, we will add some more dollars to it from our core appropriation. And for Forest Economy program, probably will be reliant on the budget in terms of having a full program budget for the forest economy, but we're still going to release program information at the same time, which will happen before the end of the year. And then maybe some of you saw the recent press we had around our J1 visa expansion program. It's not a competitive program, but it felt worthy of mention. And Liz Cross, who is one of our new employees, is our coordinator of that program. But I felt like it was worthy of mention here. Certainly, access to quality healthcare is important for all of us and the folks we serve in this region, and really wanted to at least give it a shout out and some acknowledgement as another huge program for the commission that has previously never been offered, but is offered by our sister commission, the Appalachian Regional Commission. And we do have a page on our website dedicated to this program. So if you are interested in knowing more, I know Liz is intending to probably run some like info sessions on this program in the new year. So continue to look at our website, but wanted to really acknowledge that program because this is something that our states had been requesting, and similar to in some ways to this LDD partnership program. Now that we have some staff and some bandwidth, we're able to really dedicate some efforts to these really important partnerships and programs. So pretty exciting stuff. Am I running the show or are you, Sarah? Because I need to go to the next slide.
I'm gonna give you slide control. So
Okay.
you should be
Wait. Oh, all right, good. Thank you very much. So we'll start off with our Catalyst program. I mentioned in 2023, we ran this program with both some bill funding and some core appropriation. Because we do not have a federal budget yet, our first launch of this program will be 50 million in bill funding. We are looking, the timeline and the overview are just about finalized. I fully expect those will be on the website before next Friday. We are also building out our program materials. So the user's manual that is dedicated to our programs, those are in works with the goal of putting those on the website in January, followed immediately by information sessions. And perhaps what's most important for all of you folks is we are going to be running all of our programs with 2 funding rounds in 2024. So there will be a spring round with a pre-application and application, and then we will do it all again into the fall with the goal of announcing awards twice a year, so June and November. That's going to be true of all of our programs. So this will be something new. We did do it in the forest economy program in 2023. Similar to other things we've heard that folks feel like we need access to the money. It's a long time to wait for a year. It's part of why we're trying to get our program materials out sooner, and bill funding has given us the ability to launch a program where we normally would be kind of sitting and waiting on that federal budget to be passed. So going to be a pretty huge program again, because 50 million is more than the entire Catalyst program was in 2023. It was about 44 million in 2023. So lots of money on the table for Catalyst with 2 points of entry in 2024. Next slide, please. Oh, whoops, I have control. Never mind. Tough to teach somebody new tricks. So our forest economy program, we are actually still working on the fall round of that program for 2023. So, but similar to Catalyst, we will be releasing 2024 program materials. Again, same timeline around release of materials, information sessions, and the multiple rounds of funding. In 2023, some of you will recall the FEP deadlines were not the same as Catalyst. And while that might not have impacted people as much, maybe some of the applicants you worked with, maybe not necessarily your entities, but it certainly was a pinch point for our states and quite honestly for us here at the commission as well. So for planning purposes and still being able to commit to those 2 rounds, the deadlines for Forest Economy, Catalyst, and the Timber for Transit program will all be the same, with an entry point in the spring and another entry point in the fall. And we're hopeful by releasing this information as soon as we are, that it actually gives folks more time to plan, because they will know maybe they aren't going to be ready to submit a pre-application in March, and an application 2 months later. But if they know they have an opportunity for a fall round, we're hoping it gives a little more time for project development and to just have those conversations. We recognize it's a huge lift to put these documents together, and are hopeful the 2 points of entry give folks a little more time to plan and put forward the most competitive proposal. So big shift for us. I mentioned the Timber for Transit program, and while it's a new program, I think it's always important to note that it doesn't change eligibility in terms of who can apply for our funding. It doesn't change the buckets of money that we are required to fund. But what it does give us, similar to Forest Economy, is really a much more of a niche program. We look at Catalyst as a huge umbrella that can cover a lot of and fund a lot of different programs, where like the Forest Economy and now this Timber for Transit program have come to us with much more streamlined and focused intentions. And we have really been in development of this like the last 6 or 8 months. We had some money come to us from the Federal Highway Administration in fiscal 2022 and again in 2023. We believe strongly there will be a bucket of this money in the 2024 allocation as well. But for purposes of planning for 2024, we are focused on the allocations that were made available to us in the last 2 fiscal years, which would be up to 25 million. This program is going to have a little bit different look to it in terms of there's some planning money that's specifically called out in feasibility planning, and then also for implementation. And the award amounts are much higher. So for Catalyst, the maximum is 3 for these multiple jurisdictions. So if you're doing a infrastructure project in Catalyst and money is going into multiple communities, or you're doing multiple types of infrastructure, under Catalyst, you can get a maximum of 3 million. For Forest Economy, the maximum is 1 million. And under this program, the maximum when you are doing implementation with construction is up to 5 million. So we're expecting to see some pretty large scale projects come in under this program. And there will be a lot more to come on this program, but we will be releasing an overview and an application, overview and a timeline on the website this month, and then program manual will be published for this program too in early January. So new program, more money, lots more work. So I will pause there before we roll into the next portion of the program. I see the one comment in the chat. I think that's just a message to me, but just a reminder to folks, we are recording this session. It is our intention to share the recording with all of you who have attended. And Sarah mentioned we are building out our LDD resource library so that the prior trainings and the slides attached to those will be available to all of you, but we certainly will get you a copy of this, both the slides and the recording following this training today. So any other questions?
Right, hearing none. All right, let's move into sort of the meat of today's training. There's a form for that here at MBRC, and I'm sure in your day-to-day as an LDD, you run into a lot of forms. And so one of the LDDs, or probably more than one, had asked if we could do a training session on some of the forms that we work with and that you work with through our programs. So we're really hoping to touch on some of the maybe the line items in a form that we see come in incorrectly. So we're going to go through just, some tips and tricks for a handful of forms. And, again, if there's a form that we don't go through, there's a point at the end, which you can say, hey, how about, this form? Can we look at that real quick? And the hope is just to make this filling out these forms a lot easier for everybody. So we're gonna just jump in, and before we get to specific forms, I just wanted to pull some language from our webpage on sort of what the LDD roles and responsibilities are. And I pulled out the language regarding forms. And so the bullet points here I've pulled out from sort of those roles and responsibilities. And essentially, as an LDD, we're asking if you are providing grant administration to projects that you're reviewing the forms that are filled out by the grantee for accuracy, that you're checking to see if they provide correct documentation, and also making sure grantees are filling out these forms and reports and submitting them in a timely manner. Some forms, like the progress reports in the SF425s, are submitted on a specific timeline. And then things like the requests for reimbursement form is submitted at the grantee's whim. So there are certain forms that require to be submitted by certain dates. And we suggest that you set up a clear process with the grantee. We see with some projects, the grantees will send us the forms directly, sometimes CCing the LDD, sometimes not. Some LDDs will fill out the forms for the grantee. So if the grantee is doing the filling out of the forms, we just suggest that you set up a process that they send you the forms first so you can review for accuracy, for correct documentation before sending it on to MBRC. And that will cut down on a lot of back and forth time if a process such as that is in place when working with a project. These are the forms we're going to go over today, and in this order, essentially in the order of a grant life cycle here at MBRC. And here on the PowerPoint, when you get the presentation, this is a link to our resources page that has all these forms on it to download if you need. Okay, Andrea, handing it back over to you.
Dig right into everybody's favorite form. So the project budget, which is the SF424 CBW, is one of the forms that we require both at pre-application, which we used to call our letters of interest, and then again at application. For some folks, the budget doesn't change between one and the other. That is not often the case, but it does happen. Lucky, that grantee is very lucky. But I thought it was important. We recognize the difficulty with this form, which really primarily is because it's a federal form in which we can't change it. And so what we've attempted to try to do is give more detailed instructions. We created a sample last year, but we certainly do understand the confusion that is caused from a form where it doesn't even say MBRC anywhere, or someone can't change a formula, or a formula is wrong. And so anyway, it's a very important document. It really is what we look at throughout the period of performance of a project. So it's really important that the project budget is accurate. It's also important that as the project changes through like an amendment process, sometimes the the shifts are minor in a budget and we don't require you to do a whole new SF 424 CBW. But most of the time, the changes are above like a 10%, and then we do need an updated budget. So we thought today it might be kind of helpful to talk about maybe some tips and tricks that we've thought of, certainly open to other ideas that some of you have come up with. But we decided to get one of the most difficult forms out of the way, and I apparently raised my hand to talk about it. But it's, like I said, it's important. We request it at application, pre-application, anytime your project budget changes. So let's dig right into all the things that this form does. So one of our tips and tricks, maybe some of you have also thought of it, is really, I would never start with this budget form if I was preparing a project or working with a grantee. I think it's very hard to start digging into, is it a personnel line? Is it an equipment line? Before someone's really kind of thought about their proposal as a whole. Certainly a budget and budget categories are important, but very difficult to start with this form. So one of our suggestions is really just as you're drafting or working with a project in the project development stage, is to really start asking a grantee to think about what costs they have that are associated. It's for some projects, if it's an infrastructure project and the majority of the money is going to be construction, that makes it a little bit simpler. We also ask projects, what we have seen a lot of times is someone goes, oh, well, I'm in a transitional county, so my reimbursement rate is 50%. So every line item needs to be split even between, well, HUD share, which is technically MBRC, and all my other matching cost share. And that is not what we require. So we don't require that every line item be split or be divided up based on your reimbursement rate. We actually discourage that. We actually would prefer that our dollars go into specific buckets and as few as possible. Some of that is just an easier way to kind of think about how you divide it up. It doesn't always work for every project. It's not always possible. Sometimes, especially for some of our smaller grantees who, like a lot of our nonprofits, the matching cost share is coming from an entity or an individual who has said our money has to go to X, and we recognize that that's not an immovable object, and so it has a place in the budget and it can't be changed. But we do really strongly encourage folks to not divide up every budget related cost equally across every line item. Is one thing we think about, and always with the eye of if there's other federal grant funding, that MBRC has that requirement that you can't have more than 80% federal grant funding. So that's also something that's really important for grantees to be thinking about, or applicants, I should say, to be thinking about, is where are there requirements or restrictions? Certainly a donation or an investment to a project where they're telling you what they're going to pay for and not pay for is really important to keep in mind. And the 80% federal rule for us is also one we really strongly ask that people think about. So I took the sample budget that we prepared this year. I don't know if it was helpful for people, but we tried to add some little highlights of where we have seen some pretty common items that make us have to go back and correct a budget. So as I mentioned, really few categories as possible is one thing we strongly encourage. Really thinking about the project as a whole, so it isn't just the MBRC money you have to focus on. It's where is our matching cost share coming from, for people who maybe are using some of their own matching cost share. For personnel, is that going to be sufficient to cover the 3 year period of performance. Probably the toughest thing in a budget is really around volunteer and in kind, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But specific to the project budget, really thinking about the activity, and that every line item does not need to be divided by your reimbursement rate. A couple other things to think about. It's bad enough that it says, HUD funds, and then it asks if you have other HUD funds. Apparently, this was a HUD budget, and so they got a lot of airtime. But thinking about your other federal sources, perhaps if there's other state funds, really kind of maybe not using this exact template, but really starting to think about what are the sources of money that could potentially be part of this project. If money has already been secured and that money has parameters around it, also important to think about when you're putting a project together, and certainly a budget. I would also say one of our other tips and tricks, and I may have shared this with some of you. I've suggested working from the budget narrative, which is one of the other required documents at both pre-application and application. For some reason, that doesn't feel as overwhelming as this like 8-page, multiple columned, budget. It's just a huge document and very difficult to start there. So while it's the first one we covered and it is extremely important, I also think that there are some other forms that might start to help the budget take shape. And then you can work from that document to then go back and complete this budget. But I would ask that if this sort of sample or giving you these call outs are helpful, if there are other places where you folks or people you are working with are just like not understanding something, by all means, please reach out. We require this budget across all of our programs multiple times. It's just an evil that's part of our deal. And we're trying to find ways to make it not be so cumbersome for people where we can, even though it's a required form. But we'll talk a little bit about, so this is, I think we'll talk a little bit about the budget narrative that I mentioned, but just a couple other pieces we tried to add, which we will add into our sample, is sort of where the LDD costs go. One of the pieces we're also encouraging people to think about is NEPA related costs. So for all of you, some of you may be assisting projects with NEPA. I know for sure some are doing that, but we consider NEPA costs separate from that LDD grant administration. So we are not asking you to help a grantee complete an environmental assessment with your 2% award. And so just kind of giving some direction of how we see that being kind of a separate cost, but also a really important cost. We are seeing a lot of infrastructure projects or projects that have construction that we know are going to trigger a higher level of environmental review, not including any NEPA related costs in their project budget. And realizing when we give the NEPA guidance, they're like, "Oh, I didn't plan for that." And guess what? We have to go back and say, "Well, now you need to redo your budget." And we realize that means if they've got to allocate $10,000 or $15,000 to there, it's got to come out somewhere else in the budget. So a couple of key pieces to really think about, these required pieces that our applicants probably need to be reminded about. And so we want to make sure some of these extra pieces that we're adding in kind of create a flag that help them when they're starting to think about their whole project and all the costs related to it. This is the summary form, probably the easiest part of the budget, except for the formula doesn't always work, so that doesn't make it very sweet. But this essentially takes all of the areas that you just filled in, and puts in the cost, and then technically should really be calculating the federal share and the match. It doesn't always work that well. I think we a year or so ago, we made some tweaks and got the formula working somehow. I asked one of our employees at the time, who was an Excel guru, to try to help the cause. But this is another place where we encourage people to think about that federal share. Again, not all federal funders have the 80% federal grant cap that NBRC does. So it's great that we can use other federal funding to match ours. But it's important about that 80% federal cap. That is a requirement of NBRC. So this is another place where you can kind of check that federal share amount and make sure that it's less than 80% of your total project if it's federal grant funding. Talked a little bit about the budget narrative. This is a document we created, a template. We had not had one previously, and similar to many things, if like, you know what you're envisioning when you say, please give us a budget narrative, and we would receive everything from a what essentially looked like was written on the back of a napkin in PDF to you know, a 6-page narrative about every project related cost. We also found a lot of times it was a document that was missing. And so because we require it, we felt it was important to create a template so people would have something to go from. We don't require that you use our template, but really just to give you a guide to what we're looking to be included in a budget narrative. And I just feel this document is a little easier to work with than the multi-paged 424 CBW. So one tip was just to maybe work from this form to start thinking about the categories and the kind of the description for each of those categories within this document. So we're going to walk through the narrative a little bit, the budget narrative document as well. So this is just a mirror of what the template looks like. And then we also did a sample. So we've, again, always open to feedback on, are the samples helpful? Have we missed the mark somewhere? Could we add some tips and tricks to this sample? I think we're always trying to find ways that we can make our forms as user-friendly as possible. But this is essentially a very basic, and I can say that because I created it, it's very basic, but to give just a sense of those big categories. So if you look at, you know, personnel and fringe benefits, that those same numbers mirror the SF 424 CBW. It just doesn't have all the columns, but it starts to help somebody think about, what do I have costs in this bucket? And maybe you do, and maybe you don't. And when you don't, you move on to the next one. So this is just a mirror image of the template, and then the sample to give people some reference points. And again, as Sarah said at the outset, all of our forms and samples, we've got some videos up there, tutorial videos. We've got more coming, but these documents all sit on our website, and always open to thinking about how we can continue to improve. The templates that we've created, we have all kinds of latitude. I can't do anything about the CBW and all its shortcomings, but where we can try to be helpful in helping people complete it, by all means, that's our goal. So again, this breaks down the summary page of the narrative, where you talk about what is that funding source. You guys know we saw a lot of money coming through ARPA. There's obviously a lot of times when we're partnering with EDA or USDA, there's multiple other federal funders out there. But again, this is a good opportunity to really start thinking about your sources of money. And also the secured and pending is really important. I think when we get into the information sessions, when we start talking about the investment priorities of these programs and the scoring matrix, you will see that NBRC as well, I believe each of the 4 states, certainly as it relates to Catalyst, all have a score for readiness. And if there is a project that has come to you, and let's just say it's a $5 million project, and they're coming to NBRC for $1 million, and they have no other committed money, that project is not going to score well in terms of readiness. So this is another kind of opportunity when you start talking about, oh, what do you have for money and where is it coming from? And, oh, is that secured, or that, they haven't even applied. And we all know, like, if you haven't applied to a federal funder, it might take 6 months, a year, or something, depending on when you hit the cycle. This is a really, I look at this document as kind of a 2-prong approach. The hope is that it helps you complete the project budget a little bit easier. It's also another great time to talk about the money that is committed or not to a project around timing. And maybe it's worth, with 2 points of entry, does it help if maybe somebody's going to learn about a couple of applications they've made for funding, let's say in March or April.
So that
and and they decide, what, I'm going to wait and apply in the fall, because they might score better in readiness, because let's just say they get awarded some of that money in April, it now becomes committed money. And when you start looking at that project as a whole and what dollars are available and secured, that helps the readiness score. So just a little PS on that. So in the suite of SFs, we also have the 424. This document is only required at time of application. So unlike the last 2 we talked about, this document is only required at time of application. It's a form that was updated. Georgia probably will remember better than I, but I believe it was updated this past year in between our funding and award. And the update, a lot of people had a really hard time, and I don't know if it was just the version of Adobe or something, but there were a lot of issues with downloading the SF424. But again, it's required at time of application. We do have a sample of this form as well on our website, and is one of the forms we use in making sure that 80% federal grant cap. There's just multiple places where we cross-reference and double check that figure. This form is not as long as the last 2 that we talked about. But I would it's an important form, and it's one, for whatever reason, seems to be a bit challenging, and I blame it on federal speak. But it's one, again, another form we have no control over. It is what it is. So we thought it would be good to kind of walk through this form as well, especially those places where it seems to that kind of confuses people. And again, I blame it on federal speak, but this is a side-by-side of the template of the form itself. And what we've tried to do in the sample, because there's a lot of places in this form where it makes it look like you have to complete a field when you don't. So we tried to identify those that are absolutely required. Like the dates are weird, because it's like, date received by the state. Well, it's the date that it comes with the application, and some people submit the application a week before it's due. So anyway, we tried to give some guidance to help people know where they don't have to fill in information and where they do. And we also added some extra information in the instructions that come with this form. So, one of the places where a lot of folks get stumped is this section that you see on the right, which is the estimated funding. Some of this is where we cross-reference what this form says to what you put in your budget and your budget narrative. So some of this information is important probably more important for us as a funder, maybe doesn't seem to have as much relevance to why it's there for someone who's filling this form out. Again, totally understand that. This executive order question is also one that comes up a lot as to like, what do we put there? So in the sample, we provided some information on where you need to go. It's really New Hampshire is the outlier on this particular question. But we provide some more information on this in the instruction piece, and we included it in the Catalyst FAQ document because it inevitably that question like, I don't like, what do I put there? And this is a good reminder that the form requires the signature of an authorized official. So not all of our forms require an authorized official, but there are a few that do, and this is one of them. So we also added that note because inevitably we will get the question of who can sign the form. We did have an instance where we had some projects funded this year and we had to go back and have them update their 424 because the individual who they gave authority to sign the document was not the person who signed it. Feels pretty trivial, except for there's a few documents that we have that we consider contractual, and especially those of a federal financial nature. We do require the authorized official to sign those, and this is one of those forms. So just added that note too. So that's the excitement of the forms that I am covering today. And I know I sort of blew through those because we have a lot to talk about, but absolutely happy to answer any questions. And again, if you have other tips and tricks that you think would help us make our samples better, by all means, please let us know. I see Allison has her. Yep.
I've noticed that change orders are handled differently from one grant to the next. So change orders don't often amount to significant changes in the budget, but it's like taking out a catch basin over here, adding something over here. How do you want to process change orders and on what form?
So, I mean, not all of our projects will entail change orders. I would say if the change order is such that it's changing budget categories, that will rise to a more significant change. So for instance, if the change order now includes something that wasn't originally part of the initial budget, so it's a category of funding that doesn't even show anywhere in the budget narrative or the budget, that would absolutely rise to the level of needing a 424 CBW because we need it somewhere included in the budget. If what we've seen a lot of folks do is it's like that construction line item will often include a whole bunch of stuff. We might ask for clarification, like, is that considered to be part of like a line item? And I will say we err on the side of caution if we don't see it and we can't like clearly say that line item includes that piece you're talking about. We will ask you to update the budget or at least provide something to us to clarify where we are not seeing what you're asking to be covered. And sometimes that doesn't happen until a reimbursement request where one of our team goes and says, oh, well, we're requesting a reimbursement of X, and I just looked at their project budget and I don't see where that's covered. So it is a little case by case, and most of that is dependent on the budget that we have, the change that is happening, and the amount. So those are probably the three key factors of why one would be a little different across, in from one project to another.
Would it make sense for us to just hang on to change order logs and just provide them along with reimbursements in case, they provide some perspective?
The challenge to doing that is that if the change order is such that it does require you to redo or to update your project budget, which is for us is an amendment, that could hold up your reimbursement.
Oh, okay,
So some of it's timing.
yeah. Okay, so I had a second question, just the difference between local and applicant match sometimes isn't always clear to me. For example, if an applicant has secured a loan from a local revolving loan fund, is is that loan recorded under local or applicant match?
Would be applicant match.
Applicant match. With the difference
I'm
being,
just trying to think of a good example of local. The one that comes to mind is, you know, some of our projects have included like tax increment financing funds, which I know Allison, you're well aware of what all those are.
yeah,
But local really, we don't see a lot of local, to be honest with you. But it would be like if like an entity and they were getting some money from the town where or city where they live, or you know, like we just don't see it a lot, but that's the difference between like local and applicant. I mean, applicant is truly the money is coming from that applicant, and in the example of an RLF, the applicant is the one who's responsible for repayment of that dollar. So
okay,
that's why we would look at them in that instance, why we would say that's applicant match.
okay, great, thank you.
Thing.
All right. Again, if a question comes up, feel free to pop it in the chat, and Andrea can respond there. We're gonna keep moving, just watching the time here. So I'm going to just briefly go over some tips and tricks of filling out the standard form 270, which is the request for reimbursement. This is how projects get reimbursed for the expenses on their project. I'm not going to run through a sample form because we do have a video tutorial of me literally filling out a 270. So that is on our website, and you can review that if you want, you know, someone to sort of walk through it with you. But I just wanted to touch on some high level things that we see when we're processing reimbursements that tend to need to be corrected pretty regularly. And I also want to note in the upper right-hand corner here, for the next couple of forms, I have added sort of an ideal naming convention for forms. This is totally optional, but we see documents named all sorts of things, and a handful, half the time at least, it doesn't even have the form name in it, which can sometimes, you know, bog us down if we're, you know, downloading a lot of attachments. So just a suggestion on naming specific forms, but obviously that's not required by any means. So for filling out a request for reimbursement, one of the things that we require in the period of performance is that it always has to be whole months. So sometimes we'll see someone fill out this section and they'll say like, oh, we want to request money from November 15th to December 31st. Unfortunately, we won't accept that. We would ask to modify that to say November 1st to December 31st. That just keeps things clean when we are processing multiple reimbursements on a project, on multiple projects. If we had to keep track of when was the last date that they requested funds from, it would just get incredibly messy. So it has to start the first of a month, and then the period has to end at the end of a month. And the only caveat to that is if it's the first reimbursement and you're using your notice to proceed date. So if your notice to proceed date is November 3rd, 2022, you can put that as the start date. But that is the only situation in which we would not require you to have a first of a month and last of the month. This is one of those forms, like Andrea mentioned, that we do require an authorized official to sign. This is a financial document. We are, you know, sending you funds based on this document. Therefore, the authorized official needs to be the one that signs that. And a little later on, Andrea will touch on how to update the authorized official if that has changed since the start of the project. Like I mentioned, for the first reimbursement, in the period of performance, the date must be the notice to proceed date or after. It cannot be a date prior to the notice to proceed. If you want to, as the LDD, check the math on the 270 in box 11, which is where you fill out the numbers that you want reimbursed for. This is how we do it here internally. We look at, we basically go from the bottom of the form up. So you would do line I plus line H would equal G, et cetera, et cetera. And this is just a good way to like check the math. I would say 75% of the time the math is done correctly on 270s that are sent us, but there are a lot of forms where the math doesn't add up. So this is just a quick check on how to do that. And then also we ask that you use the supporting documents spreadsheet to help organize the backup documentation. We require it if there are 40 or more pages of backup documentation. You can use it for any amount, but 40 or more is sort of that tipping point where we find, okay, this is a lot of information for us to slog through. By providing this spreadsheet that has sort of a summary of each document, it really speeds up the time in which the reimbursement comes back to you, comes back to the grantee. So this just benefits everyone. And then we also we require backup documentation for what you're spending MBRC funds on, as well as what you're spending match on. And then just some small differences when you're submitting your final 270. This is the last reimbursement that you're going to submit at the end of your project. In box 1, you would mark final, and all other ones you're marking it partial. And then in box 8, which is sort of the end date, this is also the date you're using on your SF 425 and SF PPR final, and which George is going to touch on in just a minute here. But in those final documents, in the final 270, the final 425, and the final PPR, those dates need to be consistent across the board. This slide just has links to all those documents. So this is the blank form. This is a link to the video tutorial. You can find a sample SF270 in the compliance manual. And then this is a link to that supporting document spreadsheet. Again, it's all on our resources page. All right, Georgia, I'm going to stop sharing if you're ready to take over.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Hope you're hanging in there. These forms are, as we know, fantastic and standard. So I'm going to go over the SF PPR and SF 425. Just a little intro about myself. I'm a program specialist. I live in New Hampshire. It's really nice to be with you all on video. I also take care of some of the website updates. I've been checking reporting quarterly and annuals for 2 years now, as long as I've been in MBRC. And I do a lot of work with the USDA projects that we have. So we're starting with the SF 425. This is an annual form. It's due one time a year, anytime between September 30th and October 30th. Anytime. You don't have to wait till the end of the month, but you can. I'm going to go through this form with you line by line. This is one of the forms that I constantly have to check in with grantees about and LDDs about filling out. So we'll just go through it. This form, you might have some grantees who haven't sent it in yet. If a form isn't sent in quarterly or annual, they become they are placed on a financial hold, so they won't be able to receive reimbursements until they get back into compliance. So these are pretty standard forms that we need to make sure everyone understands that. And then for your help, it might be really great to put a calendar reminder on for when this form is due. And I'll put into the chat when I get to the PPRs how the quarters are run for 1, 2, 3, 4. As you might know, NBRC starts their fiscal year on 10/1 every year. So quarter 1 for Northern Borders is October to December. All right. So share my screen. Let's see. Are you all seeing my screen? You see both screens or just one?
Just the form.
Okay, great. This is what the 425 looks like. Whoops, this bar is in my way. And there are some highlighted boxes. Some of them are necessary, some of them are not. So we'll just go line by line, see how it goes. Let me know if you have any questions. The first line is always going to be MBRC. You can write just those letters or you can write the whole thing. Number 2 is always going to be your grant ID. Please check for accuracy on this. Sometimes grant IDs are typed in wrong, and we'd really like to make sure this is the most correct grant ID we have. I'm going to make one up. And then our recipient organization name, that's the grantee submitting the form. We'll need the name, the address, and the zip code and state. For box 4, we don't cross-reference. You can leave those blank. And box 5, you can also leave blank. Oh, it's telling me that this is incorrect, but we're just going to do that. Sometimes these forms are very particular. Unless it's a final, you're always going to click annual. A lot of other federal grant agencies could be quarterly with this form or semi-annual. NBRC is annual with this form. If you close out a project and it's like April, you will have to submit a final 425 for that project, but you wouldn't need to submit one later in the year. You close out before then. So sometimes projects close out right at the end of fiscal year, and it can be strange, but you will need to submit one for the fiscal year, and then you're going to submit your final, and those two look a little different sometimes. Box 7, MBRC operates on a cash system. We understand that a lot of people operate an accrual. This is how we have the form marked. It's not going to change how we fill out the rest of the form. Project grant period. So that's always going to be what's listed on the grant agreement. So when you're checking these forms, when your grantee sends them to you, please just pull up the grant agreement. That's what I do. I go through and I check the name, the grant ID, project period of performance, and I check the grant award, I check the match, all that on the grant agreement is really helpful when filling out this form. The reporting period end date is always going to be 9/30, whatever year, 2022, 3. If you are closing out a project, it would be the day that they that is listed on the 270, like Sarah was saying. We good with that? Let's move to the spicy section 10. Okay, so if your project or grantee has yet to receive reimbursement before 9/30 of each reporting year, the form will look the same every year. If you have received reimbursements, it will change with the amounts that you're being reimbursed. So what I do is, first thing is I check if the grantee received a reimbursement yet. I go into the file, yes, no. If it's a yes, there will be amounts listed in this first box. If and the same, whatever's listed for this top box is always going to be listed for this bottom box. It will zero out line C. We never have our grantees with cash on hand. That is not how we operate. So just want to clear the air. Line A and B should be the same if you've received reimbursements. If you haven't, those will be blank, all three of them. Then you're going to take that amount, I'm going to copy it, I'm going to paste it right into line E. Great. For now, this is making the form look a certain way. I'm going to go through it line by line. D is the amount the grant was awarded right off the grant agreement. So we'll just say this was 12. Whoa, that's a lot. All right, so the grant was awarded $12 million. It's a big one. Usually see these numbers and match. But so the grant was awarded 12 million. I'm going to put that in line D. Then line E, this is what you were reimbursed. So it's like a little math here. It's going to subtract E minus D. So when you whip out your calculator and you do some math, 12 million minus 11, whatever that number is, 888,899. So that's what the difference is between E and D. I'm pushing enter, and it's going to change line G. Did you see that happen? So that number G is representing what's your grant award. If there's a calculation error and something pops up in line H, that's how you know the form is wrong. So when you're reviewing these forms, something quickly to do is there something in line C? Is there something in line H? Is there, those are the two red flags I immediately look for before even looking if they've ever received a reimbursement. Those will tell me that something's wrong, and I'll just go in and look why. So far, we're doing well. We have line H is 0, line C is 0. The I, J, and K are representative of applicant match. So say they had 100,000 and there's a reimbursement rate, and let's just not worry about that. But the grantee has spent 90,000 of their match. It's going to show that they have 10,000 left is to spend. So what this form is kind of doing is showing what you have left of your match and your grant award. This 888,000 number and this 10,000 number are the numbers that might be helpful for you if you're trying to show and do reporting. It's like, how much does this grantee have left? This is where you would find that information. And so that's the chunk of the form. I hope that was helpful. We do need the section 13 to be completely filled out. Unfortunately, if anything's missing, I'm going to have to ask you to get that, the email, the telephone, the date. Those are all really common things to leave out. And the signature, it can't just be typed out. It has to be a signature from Adobe program that you've set up, or some sort of pre-imported signature on your computer. Or it can be a wet signature. You can print the form out and rescan it in if that's how you need to do it. Yeah, that's the gist of the form. If this is a final 425, you will select final in box 6. Your reporting period end date will be the last day that they expended funds in their 270. This number would be 12 million. This number would be the same. This number would be the same. This number would be 0 because they wanted 12 million. They received 12 million. There's nothing left in the bank. Line G is representing that difference. And this is representing their match. No match left, great. Sometimes grantees want to deobligate funds, and that is the only time you're going to see a number in H. So it would change the amounts in A, B, and E, and F, and then you would have an amount listed in H. Okay, is there any questions about this? Hi, Allison. Feel free to
Hi.
ask.
Sorry, I had to ask so many questions.
I
Line
do too.
H, under normal circumstances, should always be 0 as opposed to line F. Is that what you're saying?
Line H should always be 0 unless funds are being deobligated from the project
Okay,
in a final SF 425.
because I interpreted F to be something slightly different, whereas like maybe we just haven't requisitioned funds yet, but they're accounted for somehow. But you're just
We
saying,
have a sample document on our website that lists. Oh, yep, there it is. That lists that particular line. Just showing this as an example because I know that some of you have trouble opening our forms. This one particularly, it'll tell you this information. I meant to say this when I started with everyone, but
oh yeah,
don't get concerned. Just click out, right click on the form if you're using a PC. I'm not exactly sure what it looks like on a Mac, but you should be able to right click on any form on any computer and save link as. Once you do that, it'll download onto your computer. Okay, so I have a sample pulled up here. Yeah, line H or line F is what we have the difference of from D minus E.
Okay.
Cool. All right. So that closes out 425. I am not on the slides. So we'll go to the PPR. Billable. That one should work for everyone. This one usually just pops right up. And we will go through the form. So this is where I'm going to share in the chat the quarter dates. Okay. Is there, oh, did someone do that already? Andrea did. Thank you. All right, it's already in there. So if you want to copy that down, and I like to keep sticky notes on my desktop, it could be easy for you to build into your systems. So the PPR, we need box 1 filled out, which we already have for you. So you can't mess that one up. Box 2 is the grant ID. We don't need 3. Box 4 needs to have the entire grantee's address and name. We don't need 5. Box 6 is the grant period. Again, this is a grant agreement kind of document. You would have your grant agreement out to check these dates. I know you all are managing several projects and it can get really confusing which one you're working with. Generally, we work in 3-year cycles unless you've done an amendment and an extension. So I generally try to pull up your grant agreement as soon as I check these reports. I'm checking for making sure these dates are correct. Making sure the right quarter is in here. There's only 4 dates that this box can be unless it's a closeout. So the end of quarter 1 is coming up. That would be 12/30/2023. Quarter 2 is in the chat. Yeah, so that's how that would look. If this is a final report, you'd select no. If it is, then you'd select yes. This is a quarterly report. That's all it'll ever be, except a final. And the performance narrative. So if you all have this already saved on your desktop, just check in to see if it looks like this one. We just uploaded a new one today. We're looking for more data and information from our grantees. We can't change this form since it's a federal form, but we can hope to receive the information we're looking for within the performance narrative. So we're looking for project status, if things are going well, if they're planned, if you're on track to get all of your NEPA documents in line, if you're in process, where are you at in process, where kind of meetings are being held and job positions are being filled with our money, and challenges that might come up. Yeah, it's winter. We can't dig into the ground right now. We have to wait till spring. We understand that. Just please share that with us. And if you have any local media coverage, we would love that too. And to share it with our other grantees and our website, that would be really great. It's good data for us. It's good to let the federal government know that our grantees are successful and they're being promoted throughout their communities. Section 11 is if you have like another page, or if you actually have a formal report, that's great. You can leave 10 blank and create a page 2 to your PDF. That would be awesome. I do have to sit there and combine PDFs if you are submitting separate documents. It's part of the process, and we'd love if these documents were compiled. And then box 12 is similar to page 2 on the 425. You need to do your name, your number, your email, and the date, and an actual electronic signature, as I described before. The ideal naming conventions are listed on both of those slides. And if I think I covered it, if it's a final, yeah. Is there any questions on this one? Okay, well, thanks everyone. And I'm gonna turn over the mic for GPRAs. Just a reminder to check these documents before they get submitted to us. I have to do them all, and we're just hoping that maybe there's a couple speed bumps before it hits our actual inbox. And we hope this presentation is helpful to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Georgia. Thank you. And again, if questions come up while we're moving through this presentation, feel free to pop it in the chat there. Georgia, if you'll stop sharing your screen and I'll reshare mine. Thank you. Okay, we're almost to the end, I promise. Okay, these so basically everything Georgia went over are on in these bullet points. So, you know, hopefully you're taking notes, but again, they are here for you once we send you this presentation. And again, in the upper right-hand corner of these slides are our ideal naming convention. Again, if you don't want to, no worries. But if you felt like you wanted to take this on, that would be helpful, at least when they come into our inbox. Just make sure. Yep. So one of the forms that we collect at closeout is obviously a final SF-270, the request for reimbursement, a final SF-425, and a final SF-PPR, which we touched on just before this. And then we also collect a GPRA form that stands for Government Performance and Results Act form. And this is essentially where we're looking at project performance measurements. I'll pull up the actual form here in just a second, but some of the common mistakes that we see are an incorrect award date. Sometimes this is confused with the start of the performance period. So an award date is different than the October 1 of whatever year that the award was awarded. So make sure that's referenced on the second page of the grant agreement. And then the project cost section tends to get a little confusing because the wording is not ideal. I think you guys can see that. So here's where the award date comes in. Again, that's on the second page of the grant agreement. In this top section here, the total project costs, MBRC investment that should match the number that is on your 425 final. In most cases, it's the awarded amount. Most projects will spend the full awarded amount. But if you are, or if a project's de-obligating funds, sometimes that number is not the award amount. It's less than that. Any other federal funds, you can leave blank. All other federal funds is where you would put, or sorry, all other funds is where you would put the total match spent, and that number should match what's on the final SF 425. And then those two numbers together will equal the total project cost, again, matching the SF 425. So when we get all the final documents, the final 270, the final 425, the final PPR, the GPRA form, we cross-reference all those forms to make sure all of these numbers match. So that's, something as the LDD, when you're reviewing these forms, you can make sure all these numbers are matching across all forms, because we will be looking for that. And then down here to the performance measures. Oftentimes we get the question, where do I find that? A few places to check. One, check the grant agreement. There is a performance measurement section. Sometimes they've been listed there, sometimes they haven't. If they're not there, they should have been listed in the application, because the grantee is asked to outline them in the application. And then lastly, if you don't have the application and you think they might be in there, feel free to reach out to our admin email, and we can try and track that application down for you. And then a signature and date. And these data points we collect at project closeout, and then also 3 years after the project closes out. And just a little background on the GPRA. So this was created in respect to the Government Performance and Results Act of 1993. And this is just a series of laws that was designed to improve government performance management. And so basically it requires agencies to engage in performance management tasks, such as setting goals, measuring results. And it's, truly to ensure that MBRC is meeting our goals and objectives. And it also holds us accountable for funding appropriateness and effectiveness, and also just measuring the success of the project as well as MBRC as a whole. Any questions on the GPRA or really any other forms before we hop into some sort of miscellaneous forms that, sometimes are relevant, sometimes are not. I'm going to hand it back over to Andrea.
All right. So for folks in New Hampshire and Vermont, where we have attainment counties, so if you are in New York or Maine, significant benefit waivers do not apply to projects that may be seeking our funding. But we thought, similar to, we have obviously a number of waivers that are part of our process, but chose to focus on this one in particular because it's something we saw in the last round where entities were not clear that they needed to do a significant benefit waiver. And we thought it was important to make mention of it, and are making a special effort to put some more attention to it when we start updating our website and our additional program materials that I talked about earlier today. So essentially, if a project is located in an attainment county, and I guess I should back up and say, as I think everybody knows, every year MBRC updates our distress criteria, and we are required to release that information. So in January, along with all the other updates that are happening, our website will include the 2024 distress criteria. So within that distress criteria, we identify which counties are part of our service area, and then identify them as either distressed, transitional, or attainment. And so I mentioned we have a couple of states with attainment counties, and within an attainment county, there are what we call isolated areas of distress, or IADs. If a community is located in an isolated area of distress, they are eligible to seek our funding. If they are not located in an isolated area of distress and they're in an attainment county, but their project is actually going to be in MBRC service area, like within a distressed and/or transitional county, they are eligible to apply for a waiver. And it's important because if an entity is required to submit a waiver and they don't submit the waiver at the pre-application phase, the project would be deemed ineligible. And the waiver process is one that requires approval of our governing body. So in addition to the waiver form, so we provide the waiver form and a guidance document for what needs to come to support that waiver. And essentially, once it's received, it goes to our federal co-chair and the 4 governor's alternates. So each of the folks in the governor's alternates and the federal co-chair who make up our governing body. So they have to approve the waiver request in order for us to then invite the project to submit an application. So we felt it was important to mention this particular waiver, especially for those 2 states, because we would not want an applicant to miss out on an opportunity to be eligible to apply for our funding by missing the waiver requirement. So that it's not a difficult form. So unlike our 424 whatever, the waiver form is very straightforward. It's a fillable, PDF. It was more about the importance of its requirement in those attainment counties where a project is not in an isolated area of distress. So just touching on that one, the NEPA intake form, which all of you are probably familiar with, we did update it from 2023. So that is a required form at time of application. And it is also required again if your project changes significantly in terms of scope. So it just may have happened to one of your projects, but certainly it is something that we require at time of application. I've mentioned, I think in prior trainings, that MBRC is working with an environmental consultant. We are working on developing our own NEPA processes and forms. We're also currently engaging with the consultant and I should have remembered what the acronym is, but CEQ, which is the entity of the federal government who sort of oversees the implementation of NEPA across all federal funders. We are actually developing a notice so that we can adopt the Denali Commission's CADEX. So as some of you know, we have always followed the HUD CADEX, which just has a lot of challenges that we won't get into here, but clearly a lot of the work we do is not the same as the work that HUD does. No shade on HUD. We just recognize that it severely limits our ability to CADEX projects right now while we don't have our own forms and processes. So as another sort of stopgap measure a bit is that process is also happening behind the scenes. We are hopeful that the review of our intended adoption, which is being encouraged across all federal funders. So at an administrative level, they are actually encouraging federal funders to undertake processes to make the NEPA process much more efficient. There are a lot of federal dollars out there, not just at MBRC, and we are fortunate that we don't sit on a lot of money. We move money very quickly. But one place where we have seen challenges across all of our 4 states, and certainly now more with this injection of bill money and funding just much larger scale projects, is how do we streamline some of our NEPA processes as we move to having our own forms. So more to come on that, and hopefully my wish list for Christmas is pretty long, but this is certainly on there. I am well aware of the challenges that many folks have encountered in the NEPA process, and things taking a lot longer, or costing a lot more money. We are working with our other federal funders, in particular EDA and USDA, who we partner with on a lot of projects, to try to move our NEPA process a lot quicker. But for right now, we require the NEPA intake form at time of application. Again, as I said, if your scope changes in a large scale way during the course of your period of performance, we would require you to do an updated NEPA intake form, which may trigger a higher level of analysis or some back and forth, depending on how big of a scope change we're talking about. But just an important piece for our applicants to be aware of is the NEPA requirement, and really being prepared for what that takes in terms of both timing and also at cost. We realize that for larger scale projects, doing environmental assessments, or perhaps even higher level than that, that can take a long time, and it costs a fair amount of money to complete it. So we have seen a lot of projects in this last Catalyst round. So I will say, all that other aside, we had a lot of other federal funders where those funders had already done environmental review for projects. So a lot of adoptions. So it still requires a process for us, but we are maximizing our efficiencies in trying to utilize both adopting a NEPA that was completed for another federal funder, and as I said, hoping that this additional step we're taking to adopt the Denali Commission's CADEX, which is just a much wider net than what we currently have. Those are some key pieces that will help us move projects hopefully along and through the NEPA process a lot quicker. The form isn't one that a lot of people have a problem with. It's a fillable PDF, but I think it's really important, if you have another federal or state funder, to make sure when you complete that form, you're noting who that funder is, and contact information. So that was a couple of the updates that we made to the form in the last 6 months or so, was really more getting to some of the pieces where we ended up having like back and forth with a grantee. If we can get that information when the intake form comes in, it just moves things a little faster. So email's great, but we also get a lot of it. So that's those two forms. And then just we updated our matching funds form. It was a little clunky before, so we updated it, hoping that it really more clearly identified what we were looking for information in each of the columns. We often receive the match and cost share form with the amount of the MBRC award on the form, and we're actually really looking for the amount of matching cost share for the project, not our money, but like this form is all to say what other dollars are coming in, what's the total of that matching cost share, and then what are the who are the sources, together with the commitment of match. And I'll just echo what Georgia said earlier, that a lot of the submissions, especially like the matching funds form, where it's a form and often multiple other pieces of documentation, we don't kick it back to you if it's not combined, but you do save us a step if we get the documents together. That's how we save them to our file. So again, we don't require it, we don't kick it back. Just a sort of a little bit of a plug for helping our cause here and there. And this is another form that requires the signature of an authorized official because it is considered financial in nature. And then I just mentioned earlier today, one of the challenges we see, and although I think it's really awesome that we allow volunteer and in-kind match, I think that's something that, despite it feels like we say it in a bunch of places, it is clear that that is not something that obviously not all federal funders allow that. I do understand why it is a little more difficult to track. But we did create a spreadsheet. We don't require that you use our spreadsheet, but just to give folks an idea of the template and the kind of information you should be tracking if volunteer and in-kind match is part of your project. And that, like all of our other forms, is located on the resources page of our website. And I just wanted to mention that form because obviously if you have volunteer and in-kind, that information would be included on that form 1002. And then that spreadsheet is an additional way for you to be able to track it as you request money and demonstrate that you are also expending matching cost share. So a couple of pieces to note. I guess we've been busy updating forms now that I see all these pieces. We just updated our contract amendment form. That is on the website. Most of you know we just updated our compliance manual. So big shout out to Melina Tamer of our team, who spent a lot of time. Really, I think the compliance manual feels a lot more user-friendly to me than maybe it has over the last couple of years. And I can say that because I updated it a lot, and she just did a fabulous job really putting together I think it flows a little better from, sort of time of award, and a few more tips and tricks mixed in there. We've updated forms, provided samples. So just want to mention that all of our forms are on the website, but we do have some additional information in our compliance manual on completing the amendment checklist, but also what kind of triggers a change to a project. And people should really plan accordingly. This is a good reminder for any of you who have sort of been in the crazy mix of all that has gone on since the end of the fiscal year in September. That is the absolute busiest time of the year for MBRC as it relates to processing reimbursements, amendments. It's when everybody reports. So not only is it the end of a quarter, it's the end of a fiscal year. So we have the PPRs that we talked about, the 425s. And I think that triggers oh, I need to request an extension because, as all of you know, all of our end dates are September 30th. So really planning accordingly for when your projects are going to needed an amendment, and being prepared that does take longer for us during that particular time of the year. We prioritize those as much as we can, but it's the volume really for us, and just the various documents that are coming all at the same time. And the additional note that requests beyond 1 year also require us to communicate with our state partners where the project was funded and make sure they have approval. We process 1-year extensions without their approval, but for multiple year extensions, we do require that additional step, which again, that's some more back and forth. So it's all about timing, as it all is. I think I see a question before I go to the key contact form about the standard match, hourly rates. So and I can pull up the form, but really it's on the applicant to tell us the type of work that is going to be done. If it's some of the common ones we have seen is some of our nonprofits, where a lot of their fundraising activities are done by by volunteers, and they come up with a sort of a standard rate. We do provide a link in that spreadsheet that gives you some guidance about certainly there has to be some reasonableness to the hourly rate that you give it. We would expect to be able to without a lot of back and forth, understand the type of work that's being done by that volunteer, roughly the amount of hours that is intended to be spent, with a dollar figure for the hourly amount to give it a total. So we don't dictate a rate, but we are looking for you know, so obviously some reasonableness based on what that volunteer is doing. We have seen some volunteers be folks like that do accounting and or legal work, and obviously that we would expect to see a much higher rate, but the standard volunteer rate is really dependent on the type of work that volunteer is doing, and that spreadsheet requires you to give us that level of detail. If that doesn't answer the question, by all means, like, you're welcome to come off mute or raise your hand, whichever works. Right. So I think this is my last update. So our key contact form, Sarah mentioned we have updated our process. So if we certainly recognize that the world we live in, people come and go, and sometimes that's our authorized official. That is a person who is of significance to MBRC. As I mentioned, we require that person's signature on any type of contractual document, our financial documents. And so when that person changes, it is a higher level of documentation that we require. If you have submitted or worked on an application, which I believe probably all of you have, you know that an authorized official resolution is one of our required documents at time of application submission. And essentially, when that person changes, we are asking for the same information when a change occurs. So it's the key contact form to tell us who that new person is, together with an authorized official resolution that says the body has given this person the role of the authorized official. And those two pieces together serve as the documentation that we would need when your authorized official changes. So we totally get it. It happens. Sometimes the key contact form is for a project manager that may have changed, or someone who's kind of in charge of doing the reports or something. That requires a key contact form, but does not require that second piece of documentation like the authorized official does. So we did change that process a little bit earlier this year, and the updated compliance manual provides that the guidance on that, and the amendment checklist has been updated to include that. And then we also provided some sample resolutions on our website. Again, we don't require people to use our particular things. There's enough of that in the federal land that you have to use a federal form, but more trying to provide guidance when we're asking for something that we're trying to also provide a resource. Most entities have their own kind of resolution or document that they would use in a similar instance. But we did have a couple of folks who were like, you know, can you tell me what it's supposed to have in it? So we did one. I think there's one for a nonprofit, and I think one for a municipality. I think that's how we, but again, all that is on the resources tab of our website. Let's see. Yeah, so we've come to the portion of the program where we thought we touched on everything that we heard or we have seen might be a challenge for people, but by all means, this is an opportunity. If others have a form or forms they have questions about that they think we can provide some guidance or assistance, this is a great opportunity to do that. So Sarah, close out
Thanks, Andrea.
documents with equipment.
Whew. Excuse me. And also to note, anyone on our team is perfectly happy to, you know, hop on a video call with you at any point. You know, we don't need to know right this second what forms, you know, we didn't cover that you wanted help with. You know, if there's a form that is, you know, just giving you a lot of trouble, we're happy to walk through it with you to clarify anything. So obviously don't hesitate to reach out at any time. Tracy, so the closeout documents with equipment, we do have I believe 2 forms if there's equipment involved, and one includes a depreciation schedule. Andrea, do you want to touch on those? just briefly?
Yeah,
We are
so
close to our time. I just want to make note of that.
Yep, I would just say that, for purposes of if our money has been used for equipment and that equipment has not depreciated below $5,000, there is a federal interest in that equipment until such time as its value falls below 5,000. So to Sarah's point, when you're closing out, you would give us an inventory of what equipment was bought for the equipment that has a value of greater than 5,000 together with a depreciation schedule. So it only applies if the equipment still has a value of greater than $5,000. And then we're looking for, as I said, the depreciation schedule to show us exactly kind of when it's intended to fall below that mark. And once it falls below that mark, we retain no interest in it. The entity is free to do whatever they want with that equipment. So if
And you'll
there
find
are other
that here on,
specific questions, but yeah,
yeah,
that's the gist.
and you'll find those forms here under the standard forms. Tracy, was there a specific question about those forms or? Okay, great. Thanks, Tracy. Questions? Did that. Great. I know we really don't have too much time to jump into this listening session. I think since we are in these forms literally every day, we're like, oh, this will be quick. Just like, let's run through. And it's nice for us to sort of be like, oh yeah, there is a lot of detail that goes into these forms, but it also takes 2 hours to do that. So these bullet points here are just some of the things that we wanted to ask you guys about. As far as, topics for training, are there certain like subject experts that you would be interested in hearing from? Are you guys interested in doing in-person either training sessions or potentially like info sessions for, potential applicants? We're interested in understanding, how you manage your caseload, as well as understanding what documents you as the LDD keep on file for each project. So those are just some questions that have come to mind over the past quarter while putting this training together. And I kind of just want to open the floor. Feel free to come off mute, touch on any of those points, touch on something else. We're always here to listen, always looking to improve and provide more and better things for you all. So I'll pause there and see if anyone wants to chime in. Denise commented in info sessions in person or hybrid would be very helpful. Yes, that is something Andrea and I have discussed time and time again, sort of as we're creeping out of, COVID, if we're ever, post-COVID, but we're as post-COVID as we'll ever be in this moment, and looking at how do we best reach those underserved communities. And that's also something we want to know from you all, like how are you reaching those underserved communities and how can we plug into that? What are the ways? Is it those in-person sessions? It sounds like that in-person / hybrid would be super beneficial for potential applicants in those underserved areas. So thanks for sharing that. Vicky says, I like opportunities to meet with others serving as LDDs. So having a roundtable. Okay, great. Yep. Last time we talked about Baba, it seemed like there was a lot still in flux. Andrea, will we have more information on that in the new year?
There's been a little more guidance and we continue to update our website. I will also say we've been fortunate to hire our first staff attorney here at MBRC who joined us over the summer. And so we are working on kind of our process a little bit. Baba has just been a pretty tough. It's tough when a requirement comes out with not a lot of guidance. And how do we you know, if we're not sure, how do we ask a grantee to do something? And so having some conversations with other federal funders where, so, you know, there's one sort of point on BABA that they call them a federal cognizant agent or agency. So for instance, if project has USDA funding and they have said, you know, BABA doesn't apply to this project and it's been approved, like, how do we formalize adoption of that? So there are still a lot of moving pieces and parts, and probably would be good at some point in 2024 to come back to this group with some more guidance. But we've added some more information to, you know, to the website where it's become, we've gotten a little clarity. And we are really just working through our first couple of projects who are seeking, you know, waivers, or we're trying to formalize a process with another funder. So that's a great call out for us to think about, you know, bringing that back. I think that's one in particular where there was a lot we didn't know, unlike some of our other pieces where we feel like we've covered it and we probably don't need to, you know, just repeat the same message. But thank you for that idea. That's a good one for sure. As is the sharing and hearing from other LDDs. I think we've got some top-notch folks that would probably love to share some of their tips and tricks. We don't pretend to know them all. So, and I saw that in the chat too, which is great.
Yeah, Shasta, I think that's something we've been talking about internally, asking maybe some of our longer standing LDDs who've been in the game for a while, maybe having a few of them kind of present on their techniques, their successes, what works, what doesn't work with their grantees. And it's great to hear that that's, you know, you would like to hear from those people, because I think peer-to-peer learning is super valuable. So really appreciate that. I just want to be mindful of our time. It is past 3. So if there's anyone else that wants to chime in, again, please do not hesitate to reach out either directly to me or through our admin at mbRC.gov email with any suggestions. If you need any help with forms, I will be sending out the recording as well as the presentation, so you'll have access to that. And then hopefully soon we'll have, you'll be able to access all the trainings on our website. So you can refer either new staff, or if you want to review a training that you attended this past year, it should all be at your fingertips. So I want to thank you all for sticking with us. These slides you've seen before, but we just like to make sure you always have access to them. And we really appreciate everything that you guys do for us, for your regions. And, you know, we're here to help in any way we can. So thank you so much, and have a happy new year.
Take care, everyone.
Happy holidays.